Hi everybody, thank you so much for being here tonight. Welcome to our Young Alumni Event. The MLC OCC acknowledges the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of this nation. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country and know we have people coming from other lands around Australia. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet, and we conduct our activities, events and programs. We pay our respects to ancestors and elders, past, present and future. They hold the memories, traditions, culture and hope of Indigenous Australians. The MLC Old Collegians Club engages respectfully with Australia's Indigenous people, culture and country, and is committed to continuous learning in this area. So my name's Alex Waddell. I'm from the class of 2010 and I'm the OCC Vice President. Here tonight I've got with me Monica Bonomo, who is our Treasurer.
Hi everyone, really great to be here tonight, and thank you especially for joining us in a postponed session. We are really excited to actually be able to hold this event and really looking forward to the discussion that's going to happen this evening.
So I think we can all agree, Mon, that the last year has seen the world as we once knew it experience really significant change. Change can be both positive and negative. It kind of allows us to reconsider and refocus how our actions align with our own values and our priorities. So tonight, with the help of our panel and you, our guests, we'll be exploring how we accept and adjust to the challenges life can bring in both personal and professional settings, as well as the skills and the knowledge that we can utilise to bring about positive changes within ourselves and our own communities. So everybody is more than welcome to ask questions along the way. You will be able to type into the Q&A box and we'll ask the panel to respond on your behalf. So I'd like to introduce our fabulous panel that we have for tonight. First of all is Susan Travis. After completing her undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in economics, Susan has worked as an economist in the private and public sectors as well as academia, and her work is mainly focused on trade and investment, particularly relating to the Australian and Chinese economies, and looking really at data and technology policy. And we have Chloe Sanford. After starting her career in consulting, Chloe now works for RMIT University, leading cross-functional teams through strategic enterprise projects and change. So she has a strong background in design thinking and innovation and is really passionate about creating sustainable outcomes through collaborative design. And our final panelist, Mimi, graduated MLC in 2020 and has just begun her Bachelor of Science at the University of Melbourne. And she's juggling life as an athlete, playing with Carlton in the AFLW competition. So thank you to all our panelists so much for your time tonight, and we're really looking forward to discussing how you have been able to adapt to change in your respective roles. So I might kick us off with the first question, and anybody, you can jump in and feel free to answer this, but I guess, has your perspective on change evolved, and if so, in what way?
I can start us off.
Thanks, Minnie.
As you mentioned, I played for Carlton and played 6 games my first season. It was amazing, but unfortunately, in the 6th game, I ruptured my ACL during play. Not sure if people know that injury, but it's a really bad injury. You have to get surgery and usually out for about 12 months, if not more. So that was a big thing for me. I've never been injured for a really long period of time, and sport is a really big part of my lifestyle. So I've had to, I think I've changed as a person a lot in the past, 5 months since the injury, and yeah, my perspective of change has changed. But I actually, at first the injury felt like such a bad thing, but I've come to appreciate it in some ways.
Can I actually jump in? Mimi, I'm already wondering if I can ask you a question.
Yeah.
In what way has it actually changed, and how do you look back on it positively? Because going through an injury like that is obviously really tough, and many people would hear your experience and think of it as quite a negative thing. How do you think it's had a positive impact on your mentality or on your approach, I guess, to your day-to-day? I
think it just makes you a stronger person. Being 18, I was like, oh, I can't believe I've done this injury at 18. Like I was so flat about it, but I think like you just are so mentally tough and you learn so many things about yourself. Like you have to train so hard every day, and it's so fatiguing, but you learn how strong you are as a person. And I know that I can come back better than I was before. And like it is mentally challenging. You have doubts about yourself, but yeah, I've improved a lot mentally, which has been nice to see.
Chloe or Susan, are you
How
able
about
to?
you, Chloe?
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess how my perspective's changed over the last couple of years, I think we've kind of had this evolution of lockdowns, and each time people have had to respond and react in a new way. And I remember last year we started at work having these kind of human check-ins, which is where we'd all get together and basically just have a bit of a vent in our team about our feelings. And I think you know, it was probably good for a period of time having that human checkpoint, but it started to become, I guess, almost a bit of a ripple effect of that. Here's everything we're feeling, let's put it all out there. So one thing that I've started to really take on this year is talking about what are the root cause of all those feelings, and how do we talk about the problems more than just kind of putting that negativity out there. I think there was a lot of talk around, oh, you know, let's work through this anger, let's work through these fears, frustrations by talking about them. But I think actually starting to move into what are the underlying causes, and how do we talk about what's creating those feelings has been a really big shift in my mind of how to kind of evolve with that change.
And how about you, Susan?
I guess mine is a bit more similar to Mimi's, but it's not quite as, I think, personal as an injury. It's personal in different ways, I guess. It comes back to where I was at the start of 2020, which was in Beijing. I was there, supposed to be there for the entire year to do field work for my PhD, and I'm obviously not there now. May not be obvious because obviously you can't see where I am, but I'm back in Australia and I'm in Canberra. And I probably won't be going back to China for a while. And that's a pretty big change, not just for the PhD, which in any way, shape or form, the thesis that I had planned is not possible, but also career-wise, because I've been working on China for basically the whole of my, at this point, not very long career. And at some point for lots of people, you move on and do different things for one reason or another. But it's been pretty quick, sudden and sharp for someone like me in this sort of field. Kind of like Mimi, I feel like at this point it is many senses positive. For me, it's pushed me both intellectually and also sort of personally and professionally to think more broadly and bigger about why that was important to me and the questions asked, and how I can keep doing that similar sort of work that I find interesting and meaningful in other domains. I think perhaps akin to Chloe, understanding the root causes behind the symptoms and not just seeing the symptoms of change themselves.
Susan, do you feel like, in a sense, everything happens for a reason, looking back on what's happened to you in the past year, 2 years, or do you feel like it's just been a period of something happening that's thrown a spanner in the works and then learning to accept that and adapt and be resilient?
It's a great question, particularly for an economist, because we're pretty obsessed with finding exogenous changes. They're great. Exogenous being random stuff that happens to people, and then you get to figure out what happens otherwise. Because otherwise, lots of stuff we're interested in economics is really hard to measure. But when you get these great big random events, that can be pretty helpful for lots of reasons, except if it undermines your PhD. I like to think in some sense that everything happens for a reason, but I also accept I think there's a certain amount of randomness in the world. I don't think that means we should ignore the lessons that can come from things that happen. Certainly on a bigger human scale, there's lessons to be learnt from a not particularly random outcome or event that's happened originally, and the ripple effect it's had throughout societies and the weaknesses and cracks in societies and structures that we've seen undermine some groups of people in society while others have continued to get ahead. So even if there are exogenous changes, even if they're seemingly random, I still think there's definitely something to learn from them.
Great, thank you. I guess to address the so-called elephant in the room that we've almost briefly touched on in our conversation so far, which is the pandemic that we are currently in. Chloe, I was wondering if you think that the common change that we've all experienced, I guess, in the last 2 years has made us more prepared to adapt, or whether you think overall at this point in time we're just at a point where we're really tired and we're ready for life to go back to what it was. If you could share some insight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really it's made us all like inevitable that we've had to adapt to this. It's kind of, if you had some of those slow upkeep people, it's really accelerated us into a digital world, into a remote world, into these new ways of interacting. And I think, you know, absolutely the tiredness is there. You can see that across friendship groups, family, in the workplace. But I think we've gotten to that point where people are constantly looking for new ways to innovate and change how they currently or previously have done things. We've seen businesses do amazing things, and I think that that creates a really exciting atmosphere in some ways, because we are looking at these constantly new ideas being brought to life in a much more accelerated way than what they would have been done previously. And I think it's just about focusing on what you can control, you know, things like what Susan was talking about. It's really now saying, well, what opportunities can I make out of this situation? What actually is in my control? Because change is 100% going to be thrust upon us more and more. And I think that's the attitude that I'm seeing a lot of. So yeah, I actually think it's had a pretty positive effect. And for people who thought maybe they couldn't push themselves out of their comfort zone or weren't ready to make these kinds of changes, it has been forced upon them a bit. And now I think we're better prepared for some of that even more and so in the future.
Great, thanks. Alex, I'm passing over to you. Sorry.
No worries. So, Susan, you spoke a little bit about how your PhD has changed. Are you still doing your PhD, or did you stop it all completely?
No, I'm not now. It wasn't a sudden shift because there was so much uncertainty when I came back. I came back somewhere around February, got out of quarantine, I think somewhere in March of 2020. So it was a longer, many chunks of months and of leave and going away and doing other jobs, because we all thought it would just be 6 months and then 6 months more and then a bit more and a bit more. I actually only formally withdrew, I think maybe last week. So I've technically been on leave for a very long time, which is one of those fabulous things about a PhD you don't learn until you get into these situations. But hopefully one day I'll get to go back. I expect, in some sense, I hope that it won't be the same thing, that people keep asking those questions on. They'll be answered by the time I get back and I'll get to do something else.
Yeah, so with your, when you do go back, do you feel like you'll be better able to do the work that you do in your PhD because of the changes that you've had to go through?
That's a good question. Will I be better? I think I will be better, not necessarily because of those changes. I think the huge benefit that second time around someone like me would have is having practice at planning a thesis. One of the things that is really difficult for me in this sort of work is figuring out the questions. There are sort of, I think, two people in research, perhaps along the spectrum, people that are really good at answering and figuring out the answers to questions, and those who are really good at figuring out what questions you should ask. Thankfully, I had a lot of practice and was very grateful to have that experience of that first year of figuring out how to craft a really big project and pull out what all those questions should be. And that's the really, really hard bit of research for me, the hardest bit. So that, thankfully, I guess, for when I get to go back at some point, hopefully, and finish it, would be excellent training and practice for getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And as a fellow PhD student, I 100% agree with that. Being able to, in a personal answering person, it's really easy to fall into that trap. But Mimi, do you think that the pandemic has made you embrace change or be more adverse to it?
I think that it's hard because, you know, whenever it gets announced or you're locked down for 2 more weeks, it's hard not to have the attitude like, oh, again. But I think, I don't know, we're kind of just used to it now, aren't we? So I think we just have to embrace it. I know that my team, we're so grateful that we actually get the opportunity to train and play. A few years ago, the season got cancelled because of COVID. So even just to have a season, we're so grateful. So yeah, I guess we just try to embrace every opportunity that we get, and that I get to train and play. And yeah, that's hard pressure. I couldn't say either way if I embrace it or reverse it.
It might, maybe it's a personal question. It might depend on what kind of person you are personally, I guess, or individually, to answer that one. But I actually had another question for you, Mimi. In terms of talking about how you have a team to train with and you still get to train now, when you went through your injury, do you feel like you still had the support of your team, or do you feel like it was quite isolating being, you know, out of play, and particularly last year because your work is so team-based and we were all thrust into isolation, and as you say, the season was cancelled last year. Was that quite isolating in itself, or do you still feel like you have your team around you, you know, in that sport space?
Yeah, any injury, especially long-term one, can get very lonely and you can feel really isolated, but you just got to know, like, sometimes it's on you to reach out to your teammates. They don't know what you're feeling, so I felt really supported, especially in the early days. My teammates were amazing, and my friends, my family. But yeah, it gets lonely and it's hard sometimes doing the trainings by yourself. And I'm just, I think I'm quite a determined person, so that's helped a bit. I also enjoy training, so that's good. But yeah, it is tough seeing everyone else out there playing and having fun, and you're on the sideline or in the gym by yourself. But again, it's made me stronger and more determined to get back out there.
And I guess when you anticipate or when you experience something really sudden, and Susan, you might be able to chime in on this one as well because you've had a similar experience. So when something happens that you weren't expecting that changes your course, I guess, how do you tackle accepting that and, you know, moving on from it? Do you have any tips?
Just me or anyone?
Maybe Mimi if you start, and then Susan, if you want anything to add.
As soon as I actually did the injury on the oval, it was pretty funny. I did it, and then the pain went away, and I was like, oh my God, I haven't even injured myself. It's so embarrassing. I stopped the whole game. But I guess I was walking off, and I'm quite I like to be positive. I don't like being sad. And so I think I just started cracking a few jokes and had a bit of a laugh as I walked off, even though I knew in my head it was bad. So I guess just like, don't let it change you as a person. I just try and stick to what you believe in, what you, try and keep what makes you you. I guess that sounded really cringe, but
yeah, I think in addition, I agree with all of that. In addition to that, I think from this change and from all the changes and sudden lockdowns and whatnot in the pandemic, the thing that I think is important, that I think I've hopefully gotten better at, is being a bit kinder to oneself when change happens, and accepting that sometimes you just need to sit with it a bit and let it be a bit uncomfortable, and it will get better as time goes on and you will accept it. I think that's a really important part of change that sometimes we miss out because we're looking to, well, how do you fix it? And then where do you go from there? To get there, I think sometimes you have to just accept it's a bit uncomfortable for a while and even a bit sad.
Yeah, I guess people will always tell you, like, you're allowed to, you know, emotionally react first. You're allowed to have a cry. You're allowed to feel rage. You're allowed to be angry. So that really echoes that, I think. And then, you know, the pragmatic stuff can kind of come later. I'm always told in these situations to like be kind to myself, and I think it's so easily said and often hard to do in practice because we're so focused on, you know, trying to revert back or to switch back to like our course. So it's like helpful to hear you say that, to just take some time to like accept what's happened.
I'm definitely a big believer now in having a cry. I used to never cry, and then as soon as this thing happened to me, every like twice a month I'll just cry randomly, and that's just, yeah. And everyone goes, "It's okay to cry." I'm like, yeah, I don't like crying, but I'm just going to do it, and it feels great. So I definitely back that.
Advocate for crying. That's great. Chloe, did you have any other thoughts to add to that one?
Oh, I've almost lost track of the question. When something sudden happens and you have to adapt to it. Yeah, I guess I actually started at RMIT in a brand new role in February 2020, and it was standing up a new function as a lead of the Innovation Centre, looking at new products and services. It was a bit of a dream role for me. And then, as we all know, in March, COVID hit, and all of a sudden we were struck with a lot of financial constraints. And I immediately got moved into sort of project management around operating models and org design, which was completely new to me and foreign. And I guess one thing that I've really taken from that is I'd always taken a lot of pride in being like the knowing person in the room, feeling like the expert, feeling really confident about the work I was doing and how I was going about it. And it took me a really long time in this kind of totally new world of work, new organisation, to accept that I had to ask a lot more questions and I had to get really comfortable with not being the one who knows everything along the way, and actually starting to be a bit more curious and take on a bit more of that learner mindset. Which I know people talk about all the time, and it feels like it should be something really easy to do, but it was actually, yeah, quite a significant challenge for me to not just always try and respond, even when I didn't know what I was talking about. So I did a lot of late night YouTubing on how to do large scale org design, and then worked my way through it. But I think in amongst all of that, so that was a really big learning moment for me. And then I think the other part was just when you have so much change happening around you, like for me, it was a new job and then new skill sets, new people, you've got to stick to some of the things that are really core to you. So for me, it's really simple. I always loved cooking. So when everything else was changing around me, I'd go back home and I'd just be able to cook something that I love cooking and get really comfortable in that space. So I think it was really important, to the point of being kind to yourself, to when you're having to tackle all of these different things being thrown at you, to keep that comfort space, keep whatever makes you feel good, and make sure that you really carve some time out for that. So I know a lot of people, it's exercise, it's music, whatever, but just making sure that you keep that true all the time as well.
And I guess throwing in a bit of a different perspective on change, we've talked a lot about reacting. In terms of instigating change, and I'd open this question to anyone on the panel, have you ever had to try and instigate change in the last year or two, or even before that? And how have you gone about doing that? And is that more challenging than reacting and adapting?
I can give it a quick go.
Sorry, I threw it to everyone. If you could.
Yeah, I think one of the key things I've learned, I'm thinking more specifically about my work, is really, and it's a bit of a mantra that we've got going in our team, is a start small, scale fast. So often when you start trying to push for any kind of change or create this, it can become like a bit of a mountain, and you're like, how on earth am I ever going to try and shift this huge thing in front of me? So what we've really started to do and continuously echo is, how do we start small, make it tangible, and then start to scale? So any change we're making, we look for 1 or 2 people, start to test it out, start to build that kind of champion in a really small testing bed. before we look to try and make that as big as possible. And sometimes it's, if you've got a really big problem in front of you, it's about having that technique to say, how can I break this down into smaller problems, and then how can I tackle one opportunity or one problem at a time. So I think where I've seen it done really, really well, it's capturing people's hearts and minds. So really making sure that you've got that messaging right, and starting small and creating real examples of how whatever change you're trying to make is beneficial and how it can have positive impacts on even just 1 or 2 people, and then moving to 5 and then 10. And then that's where you start to get that kind of groundswell of support around it. So I think that's definitely, I guess, my number one tip that I try and keep in the back of my mind is, whenever you're looking at how do you start it, don't go too big too soon. Just think about how do we do small ones, even with the person next to you, start to embody some of those behaviours or changes, and then let it grow.
Thanks. And I guess, Mimi, from your perspective, being part of a women's league, do you feel like you're always instigating change? Like you're part of a pretty new and a really big, grand movement that people are really proud of. And do you feel that day to day, or do you kind of get lost in it and forget about it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's very exciting, and I'm lucky that I've come in a bit later. I think early days I had a discussion with a few of the girls. They said that it was pretty tough, and it was a bit of a boys' club, and still is. But Carlton has been amazing at bringing the girls in and fostering their talent. But I've just lost my train of thought.
Do you feel like you're kind of part of a movement, I guess?
Yeah.
Like there'd surely be like a sense of camaraderie around all you girls, and
yeah, I'm not
really exciting.
If anyone saw, but they've just introduced the last 4 teams into the competition. So it will be an 18-team competition, which is really exciting as of not this season, the season after. And that's big. It's funny, you still watch the news, and the day that happened, it wasn't even featured on Channel 7 News, which they own the rights to AFL and AFLW, which I thought was outstanding. But anyway, yeah, it's still a lot that needs to change, and maybe more support needs to be, and funding and everything. But what's happening at the moment is really cool, and I'm grateful that I'm a part of it.
Thanks. And Susan?
I think, regardless of whether you're instigating or whether it's happening, or whether it's kind of in some sense forced around you, I think it's hardest when it's happening to you. You can instigate change, definitely, that happens to you or not. And I think the other is true. There's lots of people whose lives maybe haven't changed as much as others in the past year or so. Certainly it's affected everyone, but to different degrees. So mostly I searched a bit and struggled really to think of an answer to this question, but regardless of whether sort of change is getting pushed or pulled in some sense, mostly it's to how personal it is, how much it's really about what you have to do differently day after day because of that change that I think makes it more difficult.
Great, thanks. I might pass back to you, Alex, in a moment, but I just thought I'd interrupt everyone and just say to everyone who's attending, of course, there's the option to post in questions into our Q&A panel. So if you do think of questions along the way, there will be time to ask at the very end. But please feel free to pop them in as you go, because we can see them pop up in our live chat.
So, Chloe, I wanted to touch on a little bit more about what you're saying with having to learn how to do big organisation charts. So when you were doing those big organisation charts, did that mean that RMIT was going through big changes themselves in developing a new organisational chart?
Yeah, so I think it's not really a shock or a surprise to anyone here, but COVID particularly hit all of our Australian universities really hard. We lost all of our international students. We've had a really reduced intake of even onshore students as well. And obviously there's a lot of challenges around learning and teaching in this kind of environment. So because of that, there was a whole lot of new financial constraints that we'd never seen before. And we actually needed to cut our operational costs by about 33%, which is essentially a lot of that cost is your staff. So it was actually probably the most significant change RMIT's ever seen. They've been a really successful university and had huge revenue growth year on year on year. So this was a big shock to the whole system and to individuals. We went from being able to every single year invest millions of dollars into new projects into how do we suddenly save a whole lot of money to keep the university running. So it was, yeah, I guess it was a big holistic program across the entire enterprise. And I think the most important thing was just staying really key on our messaging and core to what it is that the university is about. So they had a real push back towards what we're ultimately trying to do is learning, teaching and research. You can get really stuck in these big corporations in all the, I guess, bureaucracy that surrounds a lot of these things without going back to that meaning. So it comes back to, I think, in any of these changes, what is your purpose? What is the passion that drives people? And how do we stay really central to that? Even when you're having to get into all of these other details around kind of efficiencies and operational costs and things that don't really come back to our core. So we kept just having to come central and say, how do we make this about the students? How do we make this about learning, teaching and research outcomes that are going to have impact on the community? So yeah, it was huge. And I think it's had some still kind of flow-on effects that everyone's feeling now. And, you know, it is tricky time because we thought that we would have international students back probably semester 2 this year was what we'd originally forecast. And then we thought maybe by semester 1 next year, and now it's probably looking like semester 2 next year. So it's just that constant every day. You just have to take it as it comes, and we forecast where we can.
So with those people that are, you know, not losing their jobs or not having their hours cut, how do you keep the mood? I mean, upbeat's probably not the right word, but how do you keep that sense of let's all keep going together? That sounds like it would be really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really tricky, and the impact on students is just constantly at the forefront of everyone's minds, because obviously as you're losing staff, you are potentially going to impact that student experience or that student learning experience, which is particularly critical. So I think that's really been the driving force of people who are still there. Is we've tried to engage even more with our students, find positive things for them out of this situation, as well as, I guess, some of the challenges that we can attack as a group. And that's, I think you just have to find that rallying force or vision or whatever it is that can keep people going, because it's been really big impact on people who have lost, you know, their colleagues of 20 plus years. So for us, it was really about people who work at somewhere like RMIT generally actually have a lot of passion about what they do. They want to have an impact. They're either there as a really passionate researcher or as a teacher or our students. So it really was, how do we just continuously bring us back to that core message that that's what we're there to do, and how do we keep doing that in whatever way we have to, under whatever constraints. So yeah.
Yeah, tough times for university sector, but as you said, you were able to find some positives for students. Can you talk through a couple of the positive changes that happened for students that you try to stick to?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main initiatives, which was great, and it had kind of been, it was one of those things that there was constantly blockers put up, you know, worries about our IT security, about our privacy, about different things like that. And when COVID came and everyone was forced to go digital really quickly, all of a sudden a lot of those blockers were just cleared right out of the way. So it was really great because we had some student initiatives where we connected with some of our partner universities around the world, as well as our campuses in Vietnam and Europe, and created these global classrooms, which was I guess, a new way of learning and teaching for everyone involved, but it created, yeah, a lot of really good hype. The students loved it, and I guess it's a pretty revolutionary way of running a class in a global setting, and just that interaction of not just meeting someone else from Melbourne online, but actually getting to talk to someone in Barcelona created a really good, yeah, really cool story. And it enabled a lot of empathy of how, I guess, the different regions around the world were coping with COVID. Vietnam's also had a really, really difficult time. So it just created that sense of community across a much broader group.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'd love to be in one of those classes. That sounds really, really cool. Yeah. Susan, for you, I know that you're pretty new to your current role, but do you know if things have kind of changed in the way that people in your area do work? Has that changed at all?
Sure, yes. So I just started as a consultant at Accenture, and I think for consultants, more broadly, not just at this particular firm, the big change is no one's traveling, which is a pretty big shock to the consultant lifestyle. Things have also gone online, which has sometimes been negative, but also positive, and is sometimes, I think, for spaces and ways of collaboration and options, particularly working with some clients, like government clients, for instance. And I was just on the other side of the table not that long ago. It's changed some of those dynamics and what's possible with different people around the country or the world. So I think similar in the sense to how it's changed, that Chloe's talked about how it's changed with learning, and it's opened up new opportunities and has suddenly taken away a whole lot of blockers. It has definitely too. And I saw that particularly, I think, probably more so in government, where in the federal government, prior to lockdown, lots of people didn't even have laptops. That's changed pretty quickly. And for so many people, work has become more flexible. It's become easier to integrate your whole life with work in ways that just work better for a lot of people. So I think out of that, that's been a really positive change that I've seen firsthand for lots of people that I've worked with.
Yeah, I think we also hear about how, just picking up on what you said, how work kind of seeps into the rest of our lives as well, and it can be a little bit difficult to keep up those boundaries between home life and work life. I don't know about you, but I find myself on the weekends just going, I'm a bit bored, I'll just go and do a little bit of work to pass the time. How do you put up boundaries for yourself in trying to keep work and home life separate?
I found that relatively difficult to think about in the beginning, because even though up until I joined government during the pandemic, ironically, prior to that, I'd been in jobs for my entire career where you could work wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted. But I had always been a really big separate home and office person, and I turned up to the office and worked and then left, despite the fact that I didn't have to. So then suddenly everyone had the choice to, but you were forced at home. So that was actually really difficult for me, because I couldn't physically maintain that distance between work and office, or home and office, which I'd always found really important for me in terms of balance and leaving work. So that was something that, ironically, I'd always had the most opportunity to practice that I was terrible at, and got much better, mainly in terms of shrinking that distance, but it's still being there mentally. So being really disciplined about having a desk that you only work at and leave when you're not working, and not using that laptop if you can have the luxury of not being able to do so for other things, and vice versa. So for me, it's still been about having physical, or at least, I guess, in some sense of symbolic separation, that you can leave work, even if only, and most importantly, mentally, so you get a break.
Yeah, those are some really good ideas. It'd be nice to have a couple of laptops. But that's some really good ideas. So for Mimi, you've just started your undergrad at University of Melbourne, and so obviously you're starting all online. How's that going for you?
It's okay. I'm enjoying uni, but obviously it would be better to be on campus, especially because I'm doing science. So there's a lot of labs and experiments and stuff that we would like to be doing on campus. And it's quite funny. You know, when you're on Zoom, you get put into an awkward breakout room. That's enjoyable. But yeah, I actually still managed to meet quite a few people and develop some good relationships, which has been nice. And I'm really excited to actually meet these people in person. But yeah, the uni at Melbourne has done a great job at like providing the resources to help you. It's pretty full on. I've missed a few assignments and classes, but yeah, I'm getting there. And yeah, online format has improved a lot, I'm assuming, because of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's really great. And obviously you finished up year 12 in the pandemic, so you're kind of used to working online. Do you think that has set you up for studying online now?
Yeah, definitely. It was tough, but again, yeah, there is advantages to it. You know, you finish your class on Zoom in year 12 and then you're at home, you get to go get some snacks and you go for a walk. It was pretty good. But it also was hard, like you've just finished a whole day on your computer and then you know that you need to study for the whole afternoon on your computer. But definitely it has set me up well for this year, but hoping to get into uni at some point.
Yeah, for sure. One?
I was just going to point out that we are heading towards the back end of our panel discussion. So if anyone who's attending has any questions to pop into our chat, please do, because we can start going through those shortly. There are a couple that have popped up actually in the last few minutes that I wanted to bring forward. But yeah, please do if anyone's listening and has wants to pick anyone's brains on any particular topic that we've talked about already or has something new to ask, please post it into the chat. One of the questions is for you, Susan. How have you managed the decision to leave a job and start a new one? And I guess what I want to add to that question as well is, how do you know when it's time to pivot to something new or whether to persist with what you're already going on with in that moment?
Okay, so how do you know? I think I'm going to hopefully tweak the first one to make them a bit more different and make my life easier. How do you know sort of which option to pick, be it where you stay or where you go, or if you're lucky enough to have lots of options? I think if you are fortunate enough to know why you like to do the things that you do in a bigger picture sense, in a longer term sense, then I think that should often be the driving factor behind those decisions. How does it fit into a bigger plan or a desire to answer bigger questions, or just a more fundamental driver about what you want to work on or how or with whom, and how that makes you useful or makes you want to get up each day in the morning or otherwise contributes to your life and how you exist in society. In terms of your second question, which I think was more around when you're somewhere, how do you know if you need to more instigate change rather than make choose those options? That I think is the more difficult one, because in the first one, I think when you've got a choice and it's really clear what the options are, you know you have to make a decision. When you don't know whether you need to make a decision, I think it's more about figuring out what makes something worthwhile for you. And what are those needs? Are there constraints that change that you're able to adapt to or shift to or can find the positives in? Or there are changes in constraints that are really just non-negotiables for what that situation used to be or could become? Part of that, I think, is then about, and the things that I've thought about before in those situations, is how much can you either shift those constraints, ask for help, for instance, or change where you're at and shift slightly sort of left or right rather than forward and back, if that makes sense in a more abstract way. So is there something that you can mold about the situation that makes it better, makes it more tenable, makes it more rewarding? And if you can't do that, then where do you need to go, and what is that change that you need to make to another option?
Great, thank you. And Chloe, there's also a question for you in here. And it's around your job switch last year from just pre-pandemic and then into post-pandemic role. Do you feel like this new path that you're now on is your new path, or do you in some ways plan to go back to what you originally started doing at RMIT? Or are you not sure?
No, I was just thinking I 100% want to go back to my original dream role. That would be as quickly as I could. I think this has been really good for me, honestly, from a personal and career growth perspective, because it's kind of forced me to learn some new skills that I probably wouldn't have just chosen without some kind of imperative behind it. So it's been really good for me from that perspective. But absolutely where my passion lies is in that design of new products and services and creating those customer experiences that really make an organisation unique and successful. I think especially in the education industry, it's evolving so quickly. There's so much room for growth. We're seeing things like Google have set up their own cadetship and degrees. Amazon now have their own version of degrees. So it's moving really, really fast. And we definitely don't want to get left behind in Australia. Education has been one of our biggest exports. So one of our biggest kind of revenue for Australia of all of our foreign students who like to come to Australia because we have such a good reputation in education. And I think it's just a really it's a really good synergy between where we're at now, moving into this digital world, and just the level of growth and innovation that education is primed for. So I think it's actually super exciting. We just need to get over this pandemic, get people back into education, and also just probably shift and rethink the way that our universities currently operate, and how do we make them more future-proof so that they're actually fit for purpose as we see people changing their learning and working lives. Like, we know that people have up to 20 different careers probably by the time we're all finished. And so how do we actually make our education structure purpose fit for that? So I think it's a really cool area. That's definitely the part of it that I'd like to get back to. But yeah, definitely acknowledging that there's a bit of a path to go for us to sort of build ourselves back up.
Thanks. And final question in here is for Mimi. Mimi, what do the next 12 months look like for you in terms of getting back on the field, managing study and recovery plans?
So I'm about 5 months into my rehab at the moment. I'm hoping it will be a short rehab, so you can get back at about 9 months, and it's looking pretty good. So hopefully I'll be able to do that. Pre-season starts in 2 weeks, which seems crazy. It feels like we just stopped. Obviously I've been training all year to get back, but I'm so excited for that to start, and we'll get pre-season for a few months, and then games are actually starting a lot earlier this year, which isn't great for me, but it's good for the overall competition because it means it doesn't overlap with the men's competition. So that starts in December. Hopefully I'll be back in January. Would love to play, even if I just got to play 1 game, I don't mind. I just want to play and miss it so much. And then, yeah, juggling uni is going to be tough, especially in the next few weeks. But we'll see how it works out. And yeah, it's probably the hardest bit is you have uni, you have work, and you have footy as well. It's hard to still have put effort into your relationships with your friends and your family. So hopefully throughout summer I'll get some opportunity to do that, but it's going to be pretty busy.
Thanks. I might pass back to you, Alex, for a bit of wrap up.
That's great. Thanks so much, Mon. Thanks so much, Chloe and Susan and Mimi. Really, I've really enjoyed talking about change with you all. It sounds like you've all been able to kind of get on with the work that needs to be done, which I kind of feel like is what we've all had to do given the pandemic. It's good to hear from all different perspectives, I think, in different places in our careers. So we're all spanning, around 10 years of out of school time, which is pretty amazing and really cool. So thank you all so much for your time, and thank you as well, Mon, for your questions and prompting, and thank you also to our attendees for your fantastic questions. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to say before we wrap up for tonight?
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you for having us.
Just a thank you from me too.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And if you heard something that you want to hear later on, we'll be publishing a YouTube link. Or if you think one of your friends would benefit from hearing some of these things, we'll be publishing that YouTube link. Also, if you have any more questions for us, you can reach out to our OCC alumni email, which is where your invitation came from. So I'm sure that Susan and Chloe and Mimi would be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. If you're from their field or want to get into their field, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions. Great. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.